In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck.
So this is a continuation of our discussion from last week where we talked about identifying. It's funny to use the word truth. It feels so existential or something, or religious, or scientific or something. But
As if it could be identified and clearly noted.
Yeah, and I think as we've seen so much, we have the new department in the. I'm not going to say I don't want to say Ministry of Truth, because it's a term that people use to derogate the new department. But there's that new Department of Homeland, in the Department of Homeland Security that is working to identify where truth is. And then we've seen a number of instances where social media platforms, newspapers, that they, at times identify something as being misinformation, disinformation, untruthful, or the opposite. And I think, every mainstream media outlet out there, probably every social media platform, has made some mistakes in that regard. And, as you and I have talked numerous times in the podcast about how to have discussions in a manner that's not going to alienate friends and family members, it's important to realize that it is difficult to prove the truth. And sometimes, for example, I'll present something that I think is, a kind of a clinching argument, and you just disagree. And I know you've done the same. I've heard you tell me that you've done the same, where you think, hey, Colin, I had this point. I thought it was just going to, that there'd be no refuting it or disputing it or anything else. But apparently it's really difficult to identify the truth and to prove it to each other. We can't use the scientific method for some of these things, and somebody pulls up statistics from one source, and then we want to look at it and disagree with it or something else. But yeah, I think we'll spend a little more time discussing those topics in today's discussion.
Okay. I like that idea. You're right. It is interesting. You would think the truth, once it was brought to the light, would be obvious, and people go, well, of course, the truth, there it is. Well, either it proves my point, or now I see the error of my ways, and now I'm going to follow the light. And clearly that's not the case, because we're still having debates about many things.
Yeah. And it's funny, if you listen to any talking heads, as we, or these media outlets, either typical journalists, or even new ones, Joe Rogan, or somebody on Joe Rogan's show, or somebody on late night television, or whatever. There are these people that aren't quite journalists but are presenting ideas, and they seem so, at times they present it in a way that seems so it's like their argument is so assured. But then you hear somebody else from the other side presenting the argument like, oh, well, maybe that data wasn't quite as good as they were saying it was,
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I think in today's discussion, and as a continuation from last time, we'll talk a little bit about how we can go about these things. So one thing I wanted to discuss was, I think it is important to identify how it is that we look at these things. And I think that, there's been some studies by Jonathan Haidt and others that talk about the fact that most people, all of us, when we're talking about truth and data and information, we think we're being a lot more logical than we actually are. And a lot of our decision making is done through emotion, and or through the way we feel about certain things. And I think to some degree, it makes sense that we do that, and to some degrees it doesn't. What I mean by that is, for example, when we start to look at the world, we have certain paradigms or ways of looking at things, certain lenses through which we see the world. And I think that's helpful. So, for example, we have our morality, and whether that comes from Christianity, or because we're a Muslim, or Islam, or because just our morality, that even if we don't believe, if somebody doesn't believe in God, their morality, their kind of structure of morality that they've created, that they've set up in their life, created in their mind, and that they feel comfortable with. And so if, for example, we hear about, somebody being treated poorly in the news, we say, oh, that's bad. And we don't have to think about why it's bad or prove it to ourselves, using the golden rule or some other methodology. We just say, oh, that's bad. And I know that it's bad. And I think that helps us to be able to filter and process information much more quickly. We hear somebody being dishonest. We don't like that. If we hear of somebody, being bought off, or a politician, for example, responding to monetary incentives, then we think that's bad because they should be representing the people. And I think that all that's important. But then we go a step further and we have paradigms or structures that we look at the world that maybe it's because we're a Republican or a Democrat or left-leaning or right-leaning or a libertarian or independent or an anarchist. And that helps us as well because, we're able to filter the information a little more quickly. But in every case, and especially in that last case that I gave, it can lead to people being misinterpreting information. Because if, for example, I am a libertarian and I don't like a lot of government interference, I do like some, but I don't like very much. And then I hear of an example of government interference, immediately my default is to go to, oh, we shouldn't have that. Government is bad. We don't want that interference. And, maybe it's one of those instances where government interference is needed. So we should be very careful as we're setting up these paradigms, or at least as we're filtering and processing the information, that we don't get too caught up in never accepting that there could be an opposing viewpoint that has some merit, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And one thing I would say about that is I think that's oftentimes where some of these arguments that happen between family members, that happen between you and I, these huge disagreements, that at times both sides, the difficulty is, if you have a paradigm through which you see or look at the world, and then you get, an opposing viewpoint, or you hear a news story that kind of represents it in a way that, well, actually the government interference is good, or maybe the corporate, the free market is working, whichever side doesn't agree with your way of seeing things, then the default would be to disagree until you get a chance to dive in a little bit deeper. Maybe I could dive into the data and figure out why it is wrong, but I'm not just going to agree with you, even though you've presented data, because if I dove into it, maybe I could figure it out and prove why it's wrong, if that makes sense.
It does.
So it does create a lot of problems.
And so, if I were to follow this thought process of yours a little further, essentially what you're saying is we want to be careful with our own preconceptions, our own ideas about where good information comes from, where bad information comes from, the type of person that presents good information, and so on. And so then we always need to make sure that we're not allowing our prejudices based on all that to shut ourselves off from viewpoints or perspectives or ideas that don't immediately align with what we would normally pay attention to. But I also think that you probably need to have, I guess, limits to that. And what comes to mind when you were saying this was, okay, so yes, let's be open to all sorts of ideas. And I remember an argument a few years back from the BBC saying that they were no longer going to give, although they tried to have lots of different perspectives, they were no longer going to allow certain perspectives to be championed. For example, flat Earth. As an obvious one, because there's just so much evidence, obvious evidence that this world is not flat, that it is round, that even though they were trying to give space and time to all sides, that was one that they didn't want to, because it wasn't worth giving that one the life. And so I think you're right. I don't want to take that idea too far, because you're right. We don't want to shut ourselves off from good ideas, but there also needs to be limits to what we're willing to open ourselves to.
Yeah, I totally agree. But yeah, I think the danger that we're seeing right now, I mean, most people, I think, don't have a problem with, I wouldn't say all people, but most people don't have a problem with saying we're not going to spend too much time talking about flat Earth because it does seem so apparent to so many people. I think the bigger problem that we see recently is, and I wanted to get your thoughts on, for example, the Hunter Biden laptop,
Hmm.
where, you know, we might dispute what it actually means, but it was written off so quickly as fake news, as Russian disinformation, as all these types of things. And so they weren't even addressing it. And then they were deplatforming people from social media and other places for and ridiculing them for saying that it had any validity at all. And then, of course, we find out later that actually it was his laptop, and they've proven that it was. What are your thoughts on that type of rushing to judgment?
Yeah, and first of all, just to address the people that may be listening to this, Colin and I had a conversation a few days ago that this was going to be a topic of conversation, and that's important because if I had come in with no idea that Colin was going to go to this onto this subject, well, then at this point I would say, well, I haven't even considered that topic, something of to talk about in years, and so I'd have to go at this point and either say, I don't know, or try and base it off my memory from what happened 2 years ago. But because we had the conversation, knowing that we were going to talk about this, I went back and did a little bit of reading. First thing I did was I found the original. Oops, wrong one. There it is. Nope, that's not it. There it is. The original New York Post article. And so this is the one that was published on October 14th. And I think it's helpful to remember the chain of events. And Colin, feel free to correct me if I'm misremembering something. But leading up to the October, I think it was 14th when this was originally published, you had, of course, this is during the presidential campaign. And for about 2 weeks before, you had President Trump saying, big news is coming. Wait till you hear this thing. It's about to happen. This thing's going to blow up. You won't believe it when it comes out. And then the day that the New York Post publishes this article, he says, "This is it. This is the thing." And then of course he got really upset that no one was really taking it seriously. If you go through and read through the article as to the chain of events that happen. So the owner of the shop that got the computer gave the laptop or the hard drive to the FBI, and then he gave a copy of it and gave it to Rudy Giuliani's lawyer. Steve Bannon then passed on the information to the New York Post. So what we have is this owner who claims it was Hunter Biden that gave him this laptop, or that he thinks it was Hunter Biden because he identified himself as Hunter Biden, but he wasn't sure that that's who it actually was. It had a sticker on the laptop that was made it look like it was part of the family's belonged to the family.
Plus, it had pictures of Hunter Biden and emails from Hunter Biden in the laptop.
It did, and so then the hard drive ends up in Rudy Giuliani's hands, or a copy of the hard drive ends up in Rudy Giuliani's hands. And then the New York Post publishes this article saying there's a bunch of emails. There's one email in particular that got people really excited about the fact that someone said, hey Hunter, thanks for connecting me with Vice President Joe Biden. And this was a Ukrainian that had sent this email. And so there's a chain of ownership that we know about. Store, Giuliani, Bannon, Post. When other news agencies asked for copies of the hard drive so they could do their own verification, Giuliani wouldn't give it to them. And so you have people that are basically have to take it on Rudy Giuliani's authority and the New York Post's authority that this is accurate and this is good information. Now, there was an article on the Washington Post that basically says, the headline was, and this came a week after, or maybe 10 days after, insisting that the Hunter Biden laptop is fake, is a trap. So is insisting that it's real. Basically arguing that you can't, just even if you know that some of the emails are accurate, one of the common methods of government espionage is to take legitimate information and sprinkle in misinformation within it. So it may well have been his laptop. It may well have been his emails, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the emails that people were interested in are accurate and that are not forgeries. And this is one of the problems in the chain of events, that no one else was given the opportunity to go investigate it. And it's interesting that we still haven't had the FBI come back and say anything about the laptop, what's been happening, about what's been going on. And so our sources are Trump, Bannon, Giuliani, New York Post. And historically, none of them have been really accurate in terms of wanting to present, or wanting to be honest, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I guess I should have realized you probably would take that tack. I understand what you're saying, and that all sounds very measured and pretty appropriate. And it's not at all what the media or the social media platforms were doing. And it wasn't, you said 2 years ago, I think it was, aren't we talking about, I guess it would have been 2 years ago. Man,
October 2020. Yeah.
Yeah. So
year and a half.
It is not at all what they were doing. In fact, they kicked the New York Post off of Twitter for presenting this stuff. I mean, if anybody was saying that, like, hey, well, they were worried about the chain of events or the chain of custody or whatever else, that would have been very appropriate to talk like that. And you're saying that now almost as if to excuse what was done at the time, which was perhaps the New York Post, jumped too quickly. And I don't know exactly what their process was for identifying the chain of custody and the validity of everything. But they were reporting on something that turned out to be true, that it was his laptop.
At least in part true.
Yeah. And everybody else wrote it off and said that it wasn't his laptop, and said that it was Russian disinformation, and kicked them off of social media platforms. So you're presenting this, well, yeah, this is how you should be really careful about it, which is not at all what they did.
Okay.
And isn't this seems like a very clear example of those mainstream media platforms and social media platforms of doing exactly where there is this risk that we're talking about, jumping to conclusions like, hey, Steve Bannon and Donald Trump are involved, it must be disinformation, plus I don't like what it says, it's got to be disinformation. And then they came up with a story, and reasons to, we got to kick them off platforms. I mean, plenty of people had tweets deleted, were kicked off of Twitter. Mainstream media was vilifying and criticizing people that gave any credence to the story, even in the way that you're talking about. So yeah, to go back now and say, well, we should be careful. That's my point. That's not what they did. They weren't careful. I agree. We should be careful, and they weren't. That's, I think, what I wanted to talk about.
For sure. No, I think we should. And here's where I want to start to make a little bit of a distinction. And I was trying to, this topic last week, there's another little concept that I've been sort of mulling around in my mind about what I want to discuss at some later point, and trying to figure out an analogy. And this is what I came up with. I was very pleased with myself with this analogy. And give me a second, because you'll see where it's, how it ties back into this. All right. Not in the, I'm deviating just for a moment, but we'll come back. Not all white people are white supremacists, but all white supremacists are white. So what that means is that when I see someone on the street and they are not white, they are African, they are Hispanic, whatever it might be, I know they are not a white supremacist. When I see a white person on the street, I don't know that they are not a white supremacist. They may be, they may not be. because all white supremacists are white, but not all white people are white supremacists. You with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Not hard to follow. Got it.
What's that?
I said it's not hard to follow. I've got it so far.
All right, good. So what that there's so much then that we can, if we take that same concept, sometimes we can't really identify whether something is or not or is not accurate. So if we when you were talking about the mainstream media is doing this, social media was doing this, the big social media companies are doing all this sort of thing. I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. When I was doing my own research on this sort of thing, I didn't look at what the Huffington Post was writing about it. I didn't look at what The Hill was writing about it. I didn't look to see if Jon Stewart wrote anything about this sort of thing, because that wasn't really what was interesting me. I was curious to see what CNN said about it. Now, and it's difficult to go back now almost 2 years and see what people were saying, because the only thing we can do is hope that they have left up anything that they put up there. Now, I think there are some Wayback Machines and other websites that you can use to go and actually accurately, to see. On CNN's website this week, they had one article that they had posted. It was about a week after the New York Post article, and it was saying New York Post found this, and we're not certain about it. Now, we also don't know what the people, CNN is a cable news show. And so all I have is what they printed on their website. I don't know what anybody was saying the week that this all came out on CNN. I have no idea. I showed the article I just talked to you about from the Washington Post came, like I said, 10 days after the event that happened. And I don't have access to New York Times. I didn't see what New York Times still had posted about it. I'm totally sure. I totally acknowledge that there was probably a lot of indignation coming out from a lot of the left-leaning sites and saying this is garbage, this is all a hoax, we don't want to be listening to this stuff. It's even possible that the two places I checked, CNN and Washington Post, had some of that going on at that time, and they've since scrubbed their site. I don't know. What I do know is Washington Post has in the past been very transparent in their corrections, but that may be something that they have done in the dark of night, and they change things. I don't really know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that didn't. I mean, it doesn't really address the fact that, I don't know. It just seems so. I mean, Brian, maybe you back for so long, it was so obvious that everybody, besides the New York Post and a few others, was saying this is Russian disinformation. I mean, people were deplatformed. I think we should just admit that yes, they were wrong. They jumped to the conclusions. They fell into the trap that we're talking about here, which is they jumped to the conclusion that this must be misinformation. I don't get what the white supremacist analogy really is, but we should just admit, yep, they were wrong, and we shouldn't do that. And there's a real danger that even these mainstream media outlets and the government, new government bureau that's going to be looking at this stuff, that they're going to jump to conclusions and they're going to be wrong about this stuff. That's why they should allow free speech and allow people just, to let the stories go. It's very difficult to disprove this stuff, What
you're doing is saying if they're white, they're a white supremacist. Because you're saying all social media, all media companies, they were all doing this thing. It was all horrible. Everybody was wrong in what they were doing. Because if you were mainstream media, you were pushing this whole narrative. And I don't, from what I'm finding now, I'm not seeing that to be the case. Yes, that was happening. Yes, there were some people that were behaving badly. Yes, you heard a lot of garbage on Twitter. What I did hear on Twitter, when looking back in some of the references in some of the articles, is that Twitter was not allowing some people to post things about it because it was unverified. It was unverifiable, and people were being accused of essentially working as a Russian agent, more or less, acting as a Russian asset. But that doesn't mean everybody, all media, all social media, a lot of the big ones were. But this is the hard part about looking back at something a year and a half ago.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, if I did use the word all media, but I mean, I'm just, it wasn't like at the time when that came out that all of that very many at all, and certainly I can't think of a left-leaning one, was saying, hey, you got to get the New York Post back on Twitter. And most every single one of them was saying, hey, this is what they should be doing. They should, and now we've got the this disinformation organization at the federal government. Like, that's the risk, is they were deplatforming people. They shut them out of Twitter. That's a huge part of their business. And all of these mainstream media outlets, whether cable or newspapers, they use Twitter a fair amount, and Facebook. That's a huge part of what they're doing. When you shut them down from that, then that really affects their business. Mm-hmm. And when they get vilified in that way, that, hey, we have to remove this because, we haven't verified it, they're reporting on a story. So you can't just take, say, well, hey, that's false, we're going to take it down until you verify that it is false. If they say they have the information, they should be able to leave that up. I don't know, you're making this weird distinction that, well, it wasn't everybody, and they were just doing it because it was unverified. No, they were calling it disinformation. That's why they were deplatformed. It wasn't just like, well, we just want to verify, we just want to be sure. They were deplatforming him and saying, that is misinformation, that is false, what you're reporting on. And it turns out later, oh, it actually was his laptop.
Yes. Now, one of the important aspects of anybody that's doing journalism or media is your reputation. And what I find interesting as I look back at this is that Donald Trump decided he wanted to use the New York Post as the microphone by which, or the speaker, the loudspeaker that he was going to go and shout this particular story through, because he's from New York, and so he knows the reputation that the New York Post has. And it's not a great reputation. It's a few steps above the Inquirer that you would often see at the supermarket, at the checkout line. And so I don't want to jump to too many conclusions, but my guess is no one else would touch it, including Fox News. And because why wouldn't he go to his favorite people over there in Fox News? Because they were going to have a difficult time verifying it. So instead he went to, something barely above a tabloid to go and post this. And and you're saying we should trust the New York Post and say, well, they must have done something.
No, I didn't.
Why?
You cannot deplatform people. You cannot call it disinformation until you verify that it is disinformation. And instead of talking about the fact that they didn't have the data to say, they said that is not Hunter Biden's laptop. This is Russian disinformation. And then, you come back later and instead of addressing the fact that they jumped to that conclusion, which has later been proved false, and you say, well, I mean, he probably went to the New York Post because nobody else would touch it, not even Fox News. Like, this is all supposition and has nothing to do with the issue at hand, which is that those media outlets were accusing the New York Post of misinformation and saying that this was false and that it was not Hunter Biden's laptop, which has later been disproved.
You made two statements. This is not Hunter Biden's laptop. This is all disinformation. I would agree with the second one, I have no doubt there were some people that were saying this is not Hunter Biden's laptop, but you were hearing a lot of people saying that this is Russian disinformation. And, this is one of the challenges. Just because you hear a lot of noise, who are the people that are speaking? Who are the ones that are putting themselves out there? Because let's be honest, on Twitter, a lot of people have a platform and have a large audience that can hear from. And it's one of the challenges about where we get our information. Are you getting it from some weird channel on YouTube? Are you getting it from someone that has spent a couple decades building up a reputation, making mistakes from time to time, but trying to, maintain some integrity in the stuff that they're putting out there? Because that becomes really important. In the end, that's all we have to go by. When someone says, I have done the research and checked up on this thing, and because we can't go and check the laptop ourselves or the hard drive, and even if we could, we wouldn't know what to look for. So we have to trust that the people that are saying they're doing that they actually are. And so their history becomes very important. And New York Post, they don't have a great history in there. And so when they say they're doing that, well, maybe they are. But a lot of other people were saying that we want to go and look at it, but Giuliani wouldn't release the data to them, which was in itself very interesting. And so, and that was the other part that was so challenging about it, is that we were hearing about it. This thing is coming, the teaser from a political campaign for the president, from actually the president of the United States at that time. He's the one saying, I got the dirt. I got the stuff coming. You're not going to believe this stuff. And then he's the one that won't allow anyone to actually verify that he actually did have the dirt.
Yeah, I don't know. He probably wasn't given, like you say, verify it. It was given to the FBI. He's not going to give it to every news outlet out there, I would presume. I don't know how this stuff works, but yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I think we keep quibbling over the wrong things. The idea is, it wasn't as if they said, well, we haven't been able to verify this yet. We can't make a judgment. It was categorical that it was Russian disinformation and or just not his laptop. It was false. It was misleading. And they deplatform those people. It reminds me, Brian, to some degree of what kicked all this off, which was that chart that I sent you that we talked about last week.
Mm-hmm.
And you tell me, I don't like that chart, and I said, well, why? I thought it was a pretty good chart. And at first you were kind of attacking you said, well, the chart itself it indicates that it can't track the information correctly. Like you were kind of attacking the validity of the chart based on where the data had come from, that the chart listed as what their data source was. And then we talked about that, and you were like, well, okay, well, I guess that's true, but it's just on Twitter, and I don't like Twitter because you can't get enough information. And then I said, well, Brian, yeah, but it's a good chart. It actually aligns with a book that you and I have both read, and presents the same information. It comes from a good source. And that to me was a similar thing where, fine, you don't go to Twitter to get your news from that place, or you don't go to Twitter to get your news, and because you like to have more information surrounding it, or you want to have a more trusted source or something like that. But it was a good chart. It did present good information, but you wrote it off very quickly. And I think that's another example of somebody kind of gets this idea, this way of looking at things, and they jump to conclusions based on their lens through which they see those things, I think this was a similar example of that.
I would agree. I think you're right. I was a little bit impulsive in dismissing that chart. I came back and had a different reason. And it's possible that reason I came back with was like it was there and I just had to dig into it. It's also possible that I felt myself trapped by my own prejudices, and I was, trying to get a more legitimate and reasonable excuse for what it was that I said. I can't, I don't really know. But I think you are right. I think that I think that it was a chart that maybe doesn't align with my typical ideology, but also it came from a person that I'd never heard of before. And I didn't know, in order to even verify that the chart was accurate, I had to go and figure out where he got the chart from, and then go and find the chart on that site, and then ensure, at least for my eyes, that one, that the site was valid, and two, that the chart was accurate. So there was a few steps that I took. I was a little dismissive, and I would agree with you. That was probably not fair. And I could do better on that. At the same time, I think we need to be careful when we start to lump everybody into the category of these people are doing something, and that we need to be mindful that even if 99 people out of 100 are doing the thing, do we blame that one person for what the other 99 are doing? And so, and unfortunately, the timer is counting down. We've got 1 minute and 30 seconds left.
Oh, wow.
So with that in mind, do you want to, anything you want to say to kind of finish this up?
Well, first, I really appreciate what you said just a minute ago. I think we all do that. I think it's wise for you to say that. I certainly have done that exact same thing. hundreds of, thousands of times. I think, the first, we all probably need to recognize that we do have these paradigms through which we see things. We should be very careful and realize that other people have their paradigms, and it's difficult to just admit, short of going and looking into every news story or every opinion that somebody gives to you to prove all the data, bring all the data forward to prove them wrong. You sometimes, we're going to make mistakes. We should be kind of a little bit understanding that people are going to disagree because they do have their paradigms, if that makes sense.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's easier to acknowledge them when we're not yelling at each other. When the emotions get up, when we're hard as I'm not backing down. I'm going to stick to my guns. And so it's much easier to talk about it when we're calm and relaxed like this. So we'll have to figure out another topic of conversation, but not right now, because that counter is at 15 seconds right now.
Okay, so, Brian.
We'll call this topic good. Good to talk to you, Colin.
You too, Brian. Good conversation.
All right, it was. Take care.
Bye.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.